are we calling this, Fred?
Living room galleries.
Living room galleries.
Today we are entering into the home of Grant Scott. Grant goes by many titles, from photographer, editor, writer, lecturer and creative director. He has worked for countless magazines from Vogue to The Guardian. Join us as we venture into his home and check out what he's got on his walls.
So this is Grant Scott and we are knocking on his door. Let's ring the bell now. Can you hear that?
I'll put it in post.
There's a knock knock. There's a knock knock knock. Hi Grant.
Welcome to the photo crib.
Okay.
Come in. Make yourselves at home. Okay, so I suppose we're here to talk about photography. The house is full of photography. Let's start at the front door, shall we? So, first picture you see as you come in, Yusuf Karsh here. This is an original Yusuf Karsh print. All the pictures we're going to talk about, none of them cost a lot of money. And actually, I bought this on Facebook Marketplace.
Wow.
And I bought 3 framed for £75.
Wow, that's extraordinary.
And then did the research to find out that they are original prints from the Karsh studio. Not signed, which means they're of no worth at all.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting was that what I discovered was that if you want to buy a Karsh print and pay the big money, basically you're buying the signature.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
There isn't anything else to it.
Yeah.
But these are original prints, Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah.
Keep an eye on it. You never know.
Absolutely. That's beautiful.
Thank you. So if we come on in, over in the corner here, a lot of the prints you're going to see in here were given to me as gifts by people whom I have a long relationship with, of kind of, I hope, mutual respect. Because as an art director, I was always having to stick up for photographers. I saw that as my job. This one here, I was commissioned to photograph Glenn Matlock of the Sex Pistols. And we went to this little guitar shop in Denmark Street in London. And at the back of the guitar shop is the original tiny little, no more than a shed, where the Sex Pistols used to rehearse, as did Bananarama. But it really was tiny. Anyway, I did the portraits, and then he had a look in the guitar shop, picked up a guitar, and said, "What's your favourite Sex Pistols song?" So I said, "Well, EMI." So he said, "I'll play it for you then." So that was my personal concert, I suppose. And that's him playing EMI.
I mean, I often give my assistants a sort of little lecture, because when things like that happen, I say, this is the joy. This is the champagne lifestyle on a beer salary.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Well, I suppose you could, if we go over into this corner, I mean, that's the case here with David Bowie.
Wow.
So this is a really torn up, scruffy print, which is quite appropriate, really, because it was given to me by Jake Chesham, who took the picture.
Great photographer.
Jake's great, and we've known each other since we were at St Martin's. We both studied graphics. I was the year above him. He was in the same year as Platon, and I was in the same year as Miles Aldridge and Mark Mattock and a whole load of other people. So it was a really amazing time. But that was taken in the garden of a terraced house in Fulham, and Bowie made us a cup of tea. And he was just so lovely, and because he was from South London, I'm from South London, Jake's from South London. I commissioned Jake because I thought the 3 of us would have a really good conversation about South London and being from South London. And that's what happened. And the strangest thing was we ended up in this tiny box room in this house upstairs, really scruffy. And there was a little really rubbish plastic cassette recorder in the corner. And he said, "Oh, do you mind if I put some music on?" We were like, "Well, you're David Bowie. You can do whatever you like." And he put on this cassette and he said, "Oh, yeah, it's instrumental." So I go, "Okay." He said, "It's something I made with a friend of mine when we were in Berlin." And Jake and I are looking at each other and going, "It's Iggy Pop. This isn't just anybody." So the pair of us, Jake got everything signed. He turned up with albums and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, smart move.
Very smart move. I, of course, turned up with nothing. And so all I have is that great memory there. There's a picture up here, which is of me, which is really rare. But I'm there, and Martin Parr is there. And it was at the screening of our film, Do Not Bend, the Photographic Life of Bill J.
Which is a brilliant film. I don't know if it's still free.
Yeah, it's free on YouTube. And the reason for that was because what happened was I got a letter in about 2010 from a guy called Jim Partridge, who used to do a TV show in the 70s called, I think it was called Me and My Camera or something. And he wrote me this letter and he said, "You are Bill J, but they'll never let you continue doing what you're doing." And I thought, okay, well, who's Bill J? I don't know. That was the end of that. And then in 2018, I get another message from another person in photography, and he says, "You are Bill J." And I thought, well, okay, if I'm Bill J, I better find out who this guy is. So I found out that he was the most influential person, I think, in photography, certainly in the UK at the end of the last century. You wouldn't have Martin Parr or Daniel Meadows or Brian Griffin. He inspired them all. He introduced Martin Parr to Tony Ray Jones. Anyway, so I thought, right, I'll make a film, but I didn't know anything about him at all.
It's a terrific film.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, the most amazing thing about Bill is that when he died, his ashes were turned into a photograph of himself. That was a process that was done. And when we screened the film, in fact, I don't think you can see it on this picture, but we actually had one of the photographs. I think there's about 8 prints. So Bill came to see the film, but only in ashes form. Wow. But I really like this picture. It's taken by a friend of ours because I'm not in it, and Martin's kind of not in it. So I kind of like. So it's the same thing you were just saying about that.
It's in exercise in sort of graphic shapes, isn't it?
Yeah, and also just playing around with the idea. I think you need to know the rules for things and then immediately break them.
Absolutely.
If you don't know the rules, you're just making mistakes. If you know the rules, then you've got a foundation to destroy. Yeah. This is an interesting one here. This picture is by Neil McDermott, who's really well known for his street portraits.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Neil's.
But this picture I saw in one of his books, and I looked at it and I thought, oh my God, I grew up on that chair. That was the chair I sat on every single day of the summer holidays and Easter holidays, because that was my mum's hairdressers, the Vanity Fair in Mitcham Fair Green. And it had not changed at all. That desk, everything about it, I couldn't believe it. So that's a really sentimental photograph.
It's not typical of his work,
No.
because there's normally people portraits, but it's very tender, isn't it? And very nostalgic.
Yeah.
And I can see why you like it.
Yeah, he was just walking past and it had closed down and there was someone in there and he could see it was really interesting. So he knocked on the window and made that picture.
It reminds me of my shoot with Paul Weller. The studio was boring.
Yeah.
It was in northwest London. And whilst my assistant was sort of setting up the lights and everything, I just went for a walk around because I was bored and in danger of being formulaic.
Yeah.
And I found this sort of hairdressers. And of course, Paul Weller's got amazing hair, hasn't he? He's got a great barnet. And to his credit, he came out with me. We went on a little odyssey after we took the studio pictures. And we ended up in his hairdressers with the things that go over their heads and stuff.
You know what? That is such an important thing for any photographer to understand, is that you've got to take control. You can't just be done unto. So then there's a Eugene Smith. So there's not really much to say about that, really. It's Eugene Smith.
Yeah,
He's,
absolutely.
you know, Eugene Smith and Walker Evans, to me, are my guiding lights. Jim Mortram, of course.
Yes.
The great Jim Mortram.
Yeah.
Jim and I have done a lot of conversations together. I've written about his work. You know, there's not much to say about Jim apart from you must know about him. And there's a lovely little portrait there. That's my wife, by David Eustace. And what's nice about that is I just met her. So it's when we first met. First couple of weeks, actually. And that was taken at a Greta Scarci shoot at Greta Scarci's house in Sussex.
I've been there.
Oh, you've been down there? Well, then you know there's a big field next to it.
She took me to this place in the woods. And
Right.
There was a sort of climbing frame.
But the Greta Scarci was really funny because I don't know if he'll like me telling this story, but Eustace and I got there and it was taking a while. So I said, I'll race you to the bottom of the field.
This is David Eustace, the portrait photographer.
Yeah, and there's some more of his work in the house. I'll show you. So I said, I'll race you to the bottom of the field. So we ran, and he hit a big pothole, went absolutely flying in the air. Hurt his knee so badly he couldn't walk. Greta's partner had to get a wheelbarrow, and we put Eustace in the wheelbarrow, and we had to wheel him. We hadn't taken a picture at this stage. We had to wheel him back up the field, and he did the whole shoot with his arm around me, that I could try and hold him upright whilst we photographed Scotty. I'm sure he'll be all right about it. But at the time, obviously, it was slightly unprofessional.
This is another Bailey, I think.
No,
not Bailey, but Bowie.
it is Bowie. Yeah. So
Gavin Evans.
Yes,
Gavin,
that's Gavin Evans. So there's 3 great people, I think, in this toilet. There's David Bowie, there's Francis Bacon, and if you spin round just behind the door, you'll see there's also Bob Dylan. And if anybody listens to my podcast, they'll know about my hero worship of Bob Dylan. So the story is about them. Gavin Evans, I've known for years and years and years. He was a picture editor on a magazine in Edinburgh called The Cut. And I vaguely knew him from there. And then I commissioned him again and again and again to do pictures. And then this Bowie picture, nobody had ever really seen it. And then when Bowie died, he put it out there on social media. Everybody went mad for this particular image. It was used at, I think it's Sotheby's or Christie's when they sold Bowie's estate. But it was stolen by so many people to put on T-shirts and turn into these different kinds of variations or whatever. And I was kind of supportive of Gavin at the time in how he should kind of handle that situation. And so he sent that to me as a thank you for that.
I think it's if people choose to sort of make copies of your photographs illegally or otherwise, it's kind of a barometer of whether you've got something definitive.
I think it is, but also I think it must be also incredibly frustrated. I mean, I think Gavin's one of the great photographers of our time, but he just never wanted to play the game. The Bacon is quite interesting because I'm sure many people will have learnt photography through John Hedgecoe and John Hedgecoe's books. Because he did a book on everything, didn't he? On how to do this and how to do that.
I remember one of my first books was by him. That name is sort of iconic, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. And he made a lot of money out of it. So much so that he bought a palace just outside of Norwich. It was this Tudor palace with a lake and
that sounds quite Alan Partridge.
It was it kind of was. And he made so much money out of doing these books that his publisher had said to him, you know, you can have a monograph of your career. But it had never happened. And so he was pushing for it and pushing and pushing. And I got a phone call from the publisher. John wasn't easy to deal with. And the publishers rang me, and I had a bit of a reputation for dealing with photographers who were difficult, with the Bailey, the McCullens, the Tim Page, and many others. And they said, look, we need an art director to do this book and to curate his archive. Would you do it? Because he's not easy. And I said, yeah, okay. So I went up to Norwich, to the palace, and he had this huge medieval barn. And on the floor of this medieval barn were cardboard boxes of prints. That was the archive. There was nothing organised. It was just chaos and chaotic. But I started to work my way through it, and we got on okay, and it was fine. We did the book, which actually is just behind you, John Hedgecoe Portraits. And as a thank you, he gave me that print, which is an original print, because he had none of the negatives. He didn't know where negatives were. He didn't know where anything was at all.
I mean, that's a really important thing, and something that I sort of got on fairly early on. You know, with the advent of Word and the various software. You know, I set up a database and started fairly in 1989.
Wow.
Everything every negative is I've got negatives that I took when I was 14. You know, and they're logged and stuff. And I'm glad now, you know, that I've made that choice.
Yeah, I wish I had. I favour the Hedgecoe approach, because this morning I thought, I knew you guys were coming. I thought, there's a great portrait of Ed Ruscha Well, it's a great portrait, but I really like the portrait I did of Ed Ruscha. And I didn't realise at the time what a big deal Ed Ruscha was when I did the portrait. And I couldn't find it, it's just cardboard boxes. Anyway, so that's the hedge coat. And then just around the corner, the Dylan is by Lisa Law, who's, again, another really interesting photographer. She did a book called Flashing on the 60s, which is all of her pictures, and that print is in there. It's in that book. But I'd phoned her up because I was looking for some pictures she'd done of another famous pop star. I was looking for pictures of a pop star. And I looked in the book and I saw she did Dylan in 1965. And so I said, well, can I buy a print? And in fact, it's one of the very few prints I've ever bought. But they stay in the downstairs toilet so they don't get any light on them.
That's a good idea. That's a very good idea.
Because I've got some great Colin Jones portraits of The Who, which are in the loft, because all of them have oxidised, because he didn't fix them correctly. And they got light on them, and now they're ruined. And in fact, a wonderful portrait of David Hockney, which has gone from being black and white to being copper, and copper toned. So yeah. So that's really, I think, the most important things in this room. We can move into the lounge.
Nice bit of Urkel.
Yeah, well, throughout my life, I've done quite a lot of dealing in furniture. And because I worked as an interiors photographer for quite a while, I was doing interiors and I was doing portrait work. So it was really important when you're working as an interiors photographer, you really need to know names of paint brands, wallpapers, furniture design. You need to know it all.
And your wife's sort of quite aesthetic as well.
Well, she worked in television for a while, TV development with Liz Murdoch. And so she was kind of involved with MasterChef and Grand Designs and all of that kind of stuff.
I photographed Liz Murdoch for the Observer.
Harry, there's no one you haven't photographed.
Well, it was very useful because subsequently I photographed her dad, and
cool.
the previous shoot he'd done, he'd given the photographer one frame.
Yeah.
And because I had a picture of his daughter, he sort of softened slightly, so I've got a roll or something.
Wow. So this is a David Eustace portrait. I think one of the great things about Eustace, I love Eustace. We're still really good friends, and we have been since I was one of the people he first saw when he came to London with his portfolio. There's a film which is on the United Nations Photography website, which was made 25 years ago, and it features a very good-looking young art director in it. I'm not going to tell you who that is, who hasn't changed in any way whatsoever.
We'll put the link underneath the video. I've watched it. It's worth a view.
It's a really good view if you want to understand David Eustace, but also working as a professional photographer, I think. And I just love the stillness of this picture. You know, I've stood next to him on so many shoots, as I have done with many photographers. As an art director, you kind of stand next to them, or I kind of stand away in the corner in the dark shadows, just kind of observing but not interfering. And I've never understood the pictures. I've stood there next to him, and he sends me the pictures. I'm like, well, how did you do that? I've never really understood that. Do you know what I mean by that?
It's the magic.
It's the magic, isn't it?
It's the secret sauce.
Yeah, and I try and do something similar, but I always have this kind of stillness in mind and simplicity.
Yeah.
I think that's the key. Over here, we have a little collection. This is Tish Murtha.
Oh, nice.
Here. This is Daffyd Jones. That's actually by me of my daughter. There you go. There's the stillness and the darkness again. It's kind of, in fact, I've never realised how similar it is.
You've been inspired by...
Yeah, without realising it. That was on the Queen's thing. We're not a hugely... I'm not wrapping her in the flag for patriotic reasons, I should say.
What was Tish like?
I never knew her as a person.
Yeah.
But Ella, her daughter, she appeared on the podcast, and I was a kind of an early supporter, I suppose, of Ella in what she was doing. But I think
with her documentary.
Yeah, and before that, because Paul, who made the documentary, I also know. But what's good about that, I mean, that was a present from Daffyd, because Daffyd Jones worked for me on Tatler a lot. This is interesting. This is Alan Jones, the artist, who, if you aware of Alan Jones?
Did he do the
great-
tables?
The tables
Yeah,
and
the
all of
sexy
that,
tables.
the sexy tables and all of that. And I went to photograph him, and we ended up talking a lot about photography. And so I sent him some magazines, and then he sent me this little card with a little message on the back all about photography. I like these little mementos.
Yeah.
I like these kind of things. So that's those. Oh, that I was going to say is that, if you want to collect photographic prints cheaply, that came if you supported the book. You got the print with the book. So that's where that came from. I think that's a really nice way of kind of building up a photographic collection. Like I was saying at the front door from Facebook Marketplace, you don't have to spend a lot of money to get stuff that you like.
Yeah, that's been my experience. I got a Leicester bookbinder signed picture of Harpo Marx for £20 framed on eBay.
Wow.
No one else bid.
Wow. Okay, I would have done, that's for sure.
Yeah, I kept quiet. When I saw it on eBay, I kept quiet.
Yeah, so
because I assisted Leicester, and so I had a saved search, and because I wanted a Leicester bookbinder original.
Yeah. Wow, that's quite something. This is another one of those examples. This is an original Richard Hamilton print. As you can see, it's signed and it's numbered. When I was a kid, there was a television program. I can't remember what year this is, but this would have been at the very, very beginning of computers. So I reckon this would have been in the early 1980s, maybe about 81, 82, something like that. And there was a television program, and they gave Richard Hamilton a computer to make an updated version, because Thatcher's in there, look, and it's kind of like a yuppie and that kind of stuff. And fish fingers and a microwave oven, all the things, and AIDS. So it must have been about later, actually. Must have been about 84. To make an updated version of his original great collage. And at the end of the television program, they said, if you send a stamped addressed envelope, we'll send you one of the prints that he's made. And in those days, that's what you did, wasn't it? You sent a stamped. So I sent a stamped addressed envelope, and a few weeks later, it came back. So it stayed with me all the way through. But it's another example, because they're not hugely valuable now. I think they're probably around £1,000 or so. But it's another really good example of just kind of, seize the initiative. Absolutely. And then you'll end up with something interesting. There's nothing really interesting here. In fact, funnily enough, here, just down here, there's a series of books where every year, both my wife and I put together a collection of all the pictures we've taken of our daughter, Florence, that year. But the rule is that nobody else must be in the pictures. So every single book is a series. She'll hate me for showing these now, because she's now 13. But it's a whole series of portraits. And at the time, my wife was like, yeah, but when she looks back on them, it will look like she never had any friends. And I said, no, it will be all right. It will be all right. So I think it's really important. So we've now got...
I think that's lovely.
So we have a book every year.
That's very nicely executed.
Of doing that, just on blurb.
Do you both take the pictures?
Well, there's a lot of confrontation about this, because we both take the pictures, and every year she tries to get the cover. And she's got the outside back, which she's quite happy about, my wife.
You're the art director.
I'm the art director. Okay.
Yeah.
Upstairs.
Yeah, absolutely. Lead the way.
Up here, we've got another little Daffyd Jones. Daffyd is another really great photographer.
He's really getting his due now, isn't he? Because in big galleries and...
Yeah, he is. And for a long time, I think his work was just seen as being party pictures. But he was the Tatler photographer when Tina Brown was the editor. And then when Tina Brown went to Vanity Fair, he went to New York with her. And then he worked for the New York Observer. And he's done his New York work is brilliant. There's a number of... Café Raw Books have done some little books of his work. But when Daffyd came back to London, I immediately said, right, start working for Tatler again and do the pictures you do. But anyway, that's a nice little... I like that one. little Daffy Jones. I suppose really this is the most important picture in the house. It's Edith Tudor Hart, who was the sister of Wolf Czerzicki. And if you don't know Wolf Czerzicki's photography, you might know him as the director of photography for Get Carter, the great sort of 1970s film.
I worked on a commercial with him.
With Wolf?
Yeah, absolutely. With Barney Edwards, a photographer. He was an
yeah.
advertising photographer, and
Yeah.
he was the director of photography.
Wow.
And so I had a lot of conversations with
He's
him.
great, isn't
Yeah,
he?
I did only realise that he was a big deal when I went in the photographer's gallery and they were selling his prints.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he basically, Wolf documented Britain from the late 1920s all the way through to the 1970s. If anybody really wants to hear an interview or hear him speak, there's an hour-long conversation I had with Wolf when he was about 95 on the United Nations photography website. But Edith was his sister. Now, both of them were brought up in Austria, in Vienna, to a socialist family, but they were Jewish. Their father was a book dealer. And so they had to get out of Germany and get out of Austria. And so she came over and she was a photographer, but she also was a Russian spy. So the whole Burgess and Maclean and all of that, Edith Tudor Hart was part of all of that. And this was bought for me by the staff at Elle magazine for my first marriage. This is quite worth talking about, I think. Just because this is by Terry Frost, one of the great St Ives painters. And I used to drink in a pub in Cork Street that he would be in most lunchtimes, and he'd be there kind of drinking away. But after I did the John Hedgecoe book, John had another book to do that he had done the photographs for, because John Hedgecoe also did all the best pictures of Henry Moore. There is a great book to get of John Hedgecoe's Henry Moore. That's a great book. But he was doing this other sculpture called Anna Maria Pacheco, and there was going to be a book, and he said, would you art direct it? And I said, yeah, okay. And I went to Lund Humphreys, the art publishers, who were in Fitzrovia, I think. And I went into reception, I said, oh, this book, and they said, yeah, we haven't got very much money to pay you. And I said, oh, that's not nearly enough. But this was hanging in the reception. So I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll art direct the book if you give me the picture.
Oh, wow.
And they went, yeah, okay, you can have the picture. So I went, fine. So I took it off the reception wall.
It's terrific. It's very graphic, isn't it?
Yeah. It's it's very much his kind of way of working and his thing. But again, I think you just need to be open to opportunities for things. And if you like things, just say, oh, can I have that? Or, because they might say yes.
Yeah.
Like print swaps,
I remember doing Damien Hirst and my friend William Leith, the writer.
Yeah.
He was always doing that. So we did Damien Hirst, and Damien Hirst was doing pictures of cocks. He was writing them on these pebbles.
Right.
I didn't have the presence of mind, so I William sort of said, "Can I have that?" He gave it to him. And I said, "Can you do one for me?" And he went, "No." I met Grant a few years back when you asked me to be on a panel at the Science Museum.
Did I?
And I think that was our sort of the start of our friendship. And
Yeah.
and I'd like to sort of thank you for allowing us into your home.
That's a pleasure.
Grant is an enthusiast, an advocate, a great photographer in his own right, and a force in the world of photography. So follow United Nations of Photography.
Yeah.
Watch the film about Bill Jay. It's a must. And just stay. If Grant's opinions tend to be very well thought through and worth listening to. So just
Thank
keep
you.
listening.
Well, listen, guys, thanks so much for coming around and looking at my crib, because I think that's what I'm supposed to say. You can get hold of me on social media on Blue Sky at UN of Photo, on Threads at UN of Photo, although I'm not a big fan of Threads. Obviously, YouTube at UN of Photo, on wherever you get your podcasts at UN of Photo. The podcast is called A Photographic Life.
Just to finish off with, perhaps to take a page out of your book, what does photography mean to you?
Memory made history.